So, the overview. BCS is the Institute for IT. There's 75,000 members at BCS, and it was always a membership organisation. It was only 4 years ago, after the first standards were launched, that BCS has become involved in apprenticeships. So, at that stage, I wasn't with BCS, as Peter's already mentioned. I was at what was eSkills, then Tech Partnership, involved with the employers that were starting to put these together. So BCS doesn't offer the frameworks, which most of you will be used to or aware of. They've only come to the market for the new standards. And that's very similar, I say that across all organisations, because although we're new to apprenticeships, every organisation, City and Guilds, OCRs, you know, Pearson's, AQAs, whoever's out there, are all new to standards. So everybody's in the same boat about learning. And your feedback is really important to all of those organisations, not just to us. They were known for ECDL. ECDL is a product that was in schools. That was their biggest product at BCS. Their biggest product now is apprenticeships. So that's how much the landscape has changed just for BCS, let alone other organisations. We only offer the digital apprenticeship, so I apologise for those who want to know a bit about management or finance, but I'll give you the actual process through the digital, but it is similar along the lines of the other apprenticeships. And there's only 3 organisations offering digital apprenticeships currently for endpoint assessment. So the choice is limited really, and BCS is the only one offering all 13 standards. The others are only offering 3 and 1. So unfortunately, if you want to go down that route, unless someone else can come to the market with an endpoint assessment, you're probably going to end up dealing with us. But that should be done through your training provider. The big levy employers, and there'll probably be more talk about this later, from April you're supposed to actually contract with the endpoint assessment organisation that you're going to work with. And that's a simple contract to say that you've negotiated endpoint assessment cost and who your training provider is going to be. And I'll put it again on there, you know, I emphasise this. There are very few training providers currently out there that have got to endpoint assessment with us. We've got 80 training providers registered with us to do endpoint assessment and to go through the gateway. Currently, we've only got 6 that have achieved that. 3A were one of those. So, how does this work then? How does the standards work? You go back to the point that we talked about. A group of employers, at least 10, have to get together and develop an expression of interest, and it's submitted to the Institute for Apprenticeships. Another new organisation in this landscape. More confusion. Another hurdle to go through that didn't exist before. And the reason I put that on there is because of the point I mentioned before. There are still gaps that you as businesses cannot fill with the current standards. If you feel that there is a need for a standard, you can approach your training provider, you can get together as a group of companies, you can approach BCS, you can go to other organisations. You need to put an expression of interest forward to the IFA. If it's approved, you need to then develop, and I hope you've all seen what a 2-page standard looks like. Pretty straightforward. It gives a job role, and then it gives you needs to cover on the apprenticeship, the knowledge element, skills and behaviours, the duration of the apprenticeship. That sounds pretty straightforward to put together. However, what sits behind it and how it works is completely different. So there are standards out there that have a mixture of those skills, and again, as I say, some organisations look at that 2-page standard and say that one technical competency we would never deliver in our organisation, so we can't do that standard. I would educate you to have that conversation with your training provider on how best to overcome that, because that 2-page standard, although it's signed off as Crown copyright and belongs to the Crown after they're created by the employers, there are ways to achieve that. It should not be an obstacle, okay? And you can work with your training provider to overcome that. So the EPAO's endpoint assessments organisations have to be registered with the Education Skills Funding Agency on a register now. And we go through our own due diligence to say that we are not going to go bust, that we're there, we've got the right skills, and that we can support training providers and you and as employers, but more importantly, the learner. The learner's at the heart of this journey, and we should be able to demonstrate we can accommodate that. Once we're accredited to that, we have to then say which standards we will offer. And as I said, we're doing the 13 digital standards currently. But the big hiccup for us is this bit, the recruitment of our independent assessors. If you imagine we've got 13 standards, if you imagine that right now we've got 3,500 and something registrations, and we've got 30 people, 35 week on week going through registrations and gateway for endpoint assessment. So every week we're doing 30 interviews post that. I've got to have sufficient endpoint assessors who are independent, not involved in the training, not working for BCS, and up to date with skills in that subject matter expert to interview those people. When we build the numbers up, and right now they're talking 25,000 apprenticeships in the digital space, I need about 200 independent assessors permanently on my books to meet the demand. We can have people who've got really, really good technical expertise, really brilliant, up to date, but they do not want to sit in front of a young candidate and have a conversation. We can't use them. Ultimately, we've got great people out there who've got great communication skills, sit in front of everybody, have a conversation, and not up to date in technical requirements. We can't use them. Finding that balance to put in there. We've currently got 18 assessors signed up, recruited, and being used, and I've got a pool of 10 at the moment that haven't been used because the next standards that they're going to assess are just coming round in February and March now for the endpoint assessment. The offer of the EPA is what I would say to focus on more than anything. Now, endpoint assessment has certain criteria in it, and there is a cost against that, which I'm sure 3A have been talking to you about. It is mandatory. They cannot do anything about it. They can negotiate with us that cost, but there is a limit that we can charge, and that's 20% of the funding against the funding band of each standard. At the moment, we're offering it at less than 10% on that. I'm not going to say it's going to stay at that because that costs, as we've just been talking about the independent assessors, imagine me saying to you, I need a cyber security person to give up a day's work to come and do an assessment. I'm only going to pay them £500 for that. They ain't going to give up a day's work when they earn more than that as a cyber security specialist. And when the large employers have to negotiate the contract or have a contract with us and negotiate endpoint assessment, that will be factored into the training providers we're working and the cost-effective delivery that they have to deliver for, and what is the cost of the endpoint assessment delivery is. So, what is the endpoint assessment then? The endpoint assessment is made up of a number of things. You have to go through a gateway, and that gateway is really the check and balance that all the stuff that somebody's been doing on their programme, they've completed. And I say now that you as the employer, for the first time, have the empowerment to say that you're happy that all of that learning's been completed. The employer reference is really key. You have to write a reference to say that individual's completed the apprenticeship, they're competent, they've done the job. If you don't submit that employer reference as part of the gateway materials, the individual cannot go through to the synoptic project, and they cannot go to the interview, and therefore cannot finish the apprenticeship. So that power is with you. I would say in most cases, I'm going to say it's the one piece of information that delays someone going through an endpoint assessment, because we have to wait for the employer to do it, and we're all busy, so it takes time. But it's a really, really valuable document. What we see, the employer's point of view, against the summative portfolio, and when they all join together, we know, having looked at that pre-interview, the standard of the calibre and the individual that's coming forward. It joins the picture together. If you've got a great portfolio of evidence of all the work they've put together, even though it's summative, and they've done a brilliant synoptic project, fantastic. The employer then says this is the best thing since sliced bread, the best apprentice they've had, then it just gives you that whole holistic picture, which the assessment is a holistic approach. They could have a really bad experience, and let's put this into context. Apprentices, a lot of cases, have done an apprenticeship because they hate school, college, university, don't like tests. It's not a test. This is about them showing their competency. And if they come and do an assessment at the end, a synoptic project, and they have a really bad day, or they interpret it wrong because they're only 16, 17, 18, that hasn't failed the apprenticeship. They're not disadvantaged. We asked them in the interview their rationale behind the approach of the assessment, why they thought, or interpreted it in that way, why they thought that was the best process. If they explain that and what they've produced is right, fantastic. Because they should be guided, and they're not in this assessment. They're put in a situation where they're not have a line manager to confide in, not to ask questions. They have to do it themselves. So they're not disadvantaged. If they fail that or get it wrong, they haven't failed the apprenticeship. The employer reference says they don't listen, they don't communicate, they don't do this, they don't do that. They shouldn't be through the gateway. But that document brings out more than anything the behaviours that are listed on the standard. So you can have a summative portfolio of all the good pieces of work they've done in the workplace, mentored by the employers and the training provider. You can have a great synoptic project that they've done at the end. There's no behaviours in that. You can think about their logical thinking, the way they've approached it, etc. But you as the employers paint this picture of whether they've turned up to work on time, if you like, but how they've approached tasks, how they integrate in the business, how they think. That is vital information to that individual, going from just what is a pass, i.e. getting through their apprenticeship, to what becomes a merit or a distinction. You hold that key. And I go back to young Alex. His employer gave him all the exposure to do work that was just way, way over what he should be doing, way in excess of what he should be doing. His thought process, the employers supported. They gave him access to all of that. His employer reference was just glowing, absolutely glowing. And that, when our independent assessor was reading it, he said, "John, we've been out and started the candidate off. We wanted to make sure it all worked." He said, "But what's written in here?" He said, "This is going to be a brilliant interview." And the excitement was building up in BCS. One, it was the first one, but the fact that we got a brilliant candidate on the first one was just... And the independent assessor was doing this. The poor candidate was at the other end on the screen, and there were 3 moderators on that call as well. And everyone came off that call, me included. I was moderating it, and just said, there is just no question. You can do the grading document, you can tick everything, but we can tell you now, he's lived up to the expectation of that employer. And therefore we can say, without ticking boxes, he's a distinction. And we walked out there, and ironically, we have to give feedback of a provisional grade within 48 hours. And after 5 days, we give a final grade. We wanted to tell him day one, he got a distinction. And we had to wait for the process to go through to let everyone know that he passed, including the individual. We have to follow our processes and policies, but it is so, so encouraging that the employers 4.5, 5 years ago sat there and went, are we doing the right thing? Because we don't think individuals will want to sit and have an interview. It's the complete opposite. Those kids, we can't shut them up. They talk for England. They're passionate about what they do, and they can just go off at a tangent. You don't have to sit there with 20 questions to say, this is what I'm going to ask them. You ask them one and they just go and they answer half the other ones for you as they're going along. They are so passionate about what they do. So there's no question the interview works, but it pieces everything together. And I'm going to say a big but, we've got failures. There are people that are failing the apprenticeship, which is what the employers again wanted. That if they weren't competent or they were put on the wrong standard, they shouldn't pass. So the system works, but there is a lot of work to go through all of this and get to the end for the learner. Yes, the training provider takes all the weight and puts them through, but the pressure of the learner is under to get a good portfolio, the employer to support them in the reference, to complete a good synoptic project and prepare themselves for that interview and go through it. And a pass is a really, really good result. We're not going to get millions of distinctions. They are the exceptional candidates. So anyone that's getting there should be proud of the pass, let alone the merits and distinctions. But that is a real test of an individual getting to the end to sit there and show that he can talk in technical language, he can talk about stuff that he's doing, and those that go over and above it, the distinction people, of how they think differently, how they approach tasks, how they take new solutions to the company. And again, I look at all of you as businesses. I'm challenged weekly by businesses that say, these kids are coming in, they're giving us the kick up the arse we need, they're bringing new things in the business, they're stimulating our business, they give us new ideas, we think differently. That's precious if these people get to the end to demonstrate that as well. They're regenerating. We were having a conversation earlier about some projects that are going on. There are young kids that are coming around the corner that I go out and see every week in schools at the minute. That's our next generation of talent. There's some serious talent coming around the corner. And we need to embrace that and how we put it through. And for the first time in digital, we've got not only the level 3 and level 4s going through this route, we've got a transition up to degree apprenticeships as well, and now a master's that's come around the corner. There is a full pathway from an endpoint assessments organisation, but for the learner's journey to go through. We've never had it before. Didn't exist. So, we've talked about this. I think, yes, we've done that. These two things are the key for me, the grading. So the grading, fail, pass, merit, distinction. Please be aware that this is something that you as employers wanted. It's something that was demanded at the front, and I'm going to say to you something that the IFA and ESFA and DFE are reviewing at the moment. And that's because across all of the standards, every sector, some have just got pass and distinction. There's no merit in the middle. What they're trying to do is align the grading for everything now across all standards. There's some person sits there in the government and goes, it's only going to be pass and distinction in the future. We will have to adapt to that, and our structure will change. The certification part is completely different to how it existed before, because the training providers used to claim the certificate for you. The certificate would go to the training providers and they would issue it. Now, the certificate goes straight to the employer. And it's critical, if you are a large organisation, what we're seeing is the head office address goes on there, but actually the learner doesn't work at the head office. So the certificate ends up at the head office, and lo and behold, they don't know who the learner is because he's somewhere else. So my encouragement to you and those of you who are using the levy and have got your own digital account, please make sure you put the right location for the learner, because that's linked to the on the ILR and linked to ESFA, where they will send the certificate. Cost of EPA, I talked about it earlier. Again, in the review of all the standards now that are coming along, not only is the standards and the criteria, but when a standard is written, it is up to endpoint assessment organisations and employers and training providers to put in a cost model that says how much it costs to deliver, the impact of it. They're reviewing that now, and what they've been looking at is an audit on us where we're not spending that 20% at the end against endpoint assessment costs, and saying, well, if you don't need it for endpoint assessment costs, we should reduce the funding band and take that out, which is absolutely ludicrous, because part of the endpoint assessment, although we don't charge that, there is a severe impact on the training provider in preparing them for Gateway, putting them through Gateway, and the support that's still needed. So the money's not wasted. The training provider needs that money to support our process and get that candidate through. So when and if any of you get that review, please think about that you might be only being charged £900, £1,200 for endpoint assessment. And this isn't just in digital, this is across every standard. Think about the cost and the implications that are involved with it next to it. And don't just go, oh yeah, we pay £1,000 now, because all we're going to do is start making it harder and harder for everyone to deliver it. And then the other part that I put on there to think about is from April, how you work with 3A, how you work with us in this simplicity of having a contract, because it is hard for all of you as large organisations and small organisations, one, to get contracts up and running, go through legal departments, get them backwards and forwards. It needs to be something simple. So for us, we don't want masses of pages of documents to go through our legal department as well. We want something that allows you a smooth process. I'm going to stop there and say, are there any questions? Is there anything that anybody wants to challenge me on or ask?
Thanks, John.
I was just going to ask about the contracting. At the moment, our main contracts and agreements are through the DAS. So is ESFA going to do something through the DAS for the EPA organisations?
Currently, we're no.
Okay.
So you're back to this.
Simpler, but
It would be far simpler. We don't have access to it. That's the problem. We're not given access to the system, and therefore, we want it to be electronic. I haven't got, a whole floor of a building I can put filing cabinets on or whatever and store paper contracts. We live in a digital world. It should be electronic. It should be stored in one place. And I'll come back to the point, our challenge with them at the moment, GDPR starts. We have to be compliant with GDPR as much as everybody else. So we don't want loads of paper contracts going backwards and forwards.
Yes?
Can I just ask about go back to the endpoint assessors situation, because we've been asked by a number of awards and organisations if we've got staff that can carry out endpoint assessments not in the digital world and in other world. So it seems to be quite a big issue for assessment organisations, and it's not just BCS, it's a number of you. What else are you doing, or is there anything else you can do? Because obviously it's going to become a big issue as the numbers increase.
I think, to go back to slide 1, 75,000 members we've got. We thought we had a great membership, great access to people. But a lot of those people, when you go up past member and up to fellow, they're all retired. We can't use it. And when we talk to the finance sector, they're in the same boat. These people are busy in their full-time job. How do we utilise those people? It's not just us, it is every sector. We tried to use larger companies, and again, we can have a conversation with Microsoft, but we know City Guilds are, we know the finance sector are, we know management, because it's a big organisation. So this is one of the things we have fed back into the system. The system works, but when we get up to capacity and all frameworks finish in 2020, there aren't enough people out across all sectors in business and in industry to support the endpoint assessment in the current fashion it's in.